Yeah, he was a great friend of the Numgrees peoples. His favorite saying used to be, give all the land back to the First Nations people. They can run it better than white people. So, but that's something he used to always say.
Well, Gilbert told me when he was in Italy that in the little village that he was in, his grandfather was an anti-Mussolini man, and they had this ritual every Sunday after Mass. They would line up all the men in the village, and one of them was his grandfather, and force them to drink cod liver oil until they threw up, and that was part of the ritual that they had to go through because they didn't support Mussolini. And Gilbert, all through his life, was a strong socialist, and he was a strong member of the NDP party, the New Democratic Party, which is a socialist party in Canada. He actually ran for the nominations for the NDP. He got the nomination to run against, but he got defeated by John Duncan, who is actually now our present Conservative Member of Parliament. But he was always very into politics, and I guess that originated from his grandfather, who was a strong anti-Mussolini Italian man.
Gilbert was NDP and I was Social Credit. And we were both very strong in those organizations. And when he ran for the NDP, I was going to run for the Social Credit against him. But for some reason, we got in a party one night, and he talked me out of it, and told me if I paid my dues to the NDP, I'd be a good member to support him. So just to support him, I paid my dues, and that was a big mistake I made. Because ever since that, they've won a donation every year.
Many people wrote letters on why they thought Gilbert should receive this award for his many years on council. I think at the time he was 28 years that he was mayor, and he didn't think he deserved it. He didn't want to go. He wanted someone to go in his place to accept the award. I think mostly because he was sick and was getting to the point of being very tired. It took a lot of people to convince him to go and do it. And so he did. That's what he was always looking for. Things to make things better for the children or for the elders. And he went out of his way to make sure when the weather was bad or if the power went out, which does quite often here, he always made sure that if an elderly woman like Mrs. Schuker made sure that she was looked after, went to visit her house to make sure that she was warm or she had a hot meal, or or took her someplace where she would be warm and would be fed. And so there was lots of things. His mind just was working all the time. He was a good man, but he was an ordinary man. That's what he thought of himself. He didn't think himself a special person or that he was so clever. And so it was a problem trying to teach his children not to put him so high up, you know. But there are people today, Gilbert's been gone for 7 years now, and I still today have people come up to me and talk about him.
Yeah, he had his ways with government. He used to go on these different conventions and one another, and then they'd have their meetings, and then afterwards he would go out for a few beers. And Gilbert wasn't a real heavy drinker. He didn't drink heavy, but he'd get these guys half looped up, and then they'd make promises.
There was one time he went out with Alex Fraser to a pub, and there was a group of them, and Alex Fraser was the Minister of Highways at the time, and Gilbert was talking about paving, and Alex Fraser, after a few beers, he says, I'll pave the whole of Alert Bay. So Gilbert said, oh, just put that in writing, would you? And he got him to sign it. And then the next day he goes to him and he says, Alex, here's what you said. Oh, geez, Gilbert. But he got the First Street paved. He didn't pave the whole of Alert Bay, but he paved the whole of First Street from a ministerial grant.
He would lobby very hard to get funds to do projects such as the seawalls around the village, the little fences along the top of the seawalls, the lighting, the village square, the piazza, and many projects such as that. And one of his main goals was to create employment, to create jobs for people so that the community would stay thriving and healthy with people working and making good money and supporting the stores. And so he was masterful at convincing people in higher levels of government to contribute money for such projects.
He was honest, that was one thing about him. That was a big item for him, you know, because he got involved in politics and everything, and you have to be an honest person for that.
We share the island, Cormorant Island, with the Numgus First Nation, our First Nations partners and allies and friends who originally lived in the Nimkish Valley across the water from us. And they came here to use the cedar trees and to use it as a camp originally. And then when the contact with white government, I guess, the non-First Nations government, they forced basically the Numgus to move here to this island, to the reservation on the island. And Gilbert was extremely good at crossing boundaries or melting boundaries, if you will. And I guess the epitome of that, or the example of how we work in unison together, would be the Alert Bay Accord. That was an agreement between the Numgus First Nation and the village of Alert Bay to work in cooperation on things that are common to both communities. So whether it's health, hospital, roads, garbage, sewers, all of those things, we work very closely together. Education. So a very tight partnership. And Gilbert and Chief Bill Cramner were the main impetus, the main push behind creating that union where we can work together towards common goals for the community.
One of the things that I guess he was trying to tell us is the effects post-war, post-Second World War, and how people were suffering a great deal, and trying to bring themselves up after that awful time.
When the war was on, Gilbert was 10 years old, 8 years old. And he used to talk about the planes flying overhead and watching them fight. He watched planes being shot down, men parachuting out of their planes, and he fell in love with flying. He just thought it was a truly wonderful thing. Like when the war was on, he was just a little boy, and it was all a big adventure. But he used to have dreams, nightmares about the war. The only way I would know he was having a dream is that he would start talking in Italian and thrashing about, and so I would have to wake him to stop, and then he would tell me what he was dreaming, and it was always about the war and the bombing and the planes, and he had nightmares for a long time, but they eventually went away, and he stopped having them. Gilbert was brought from Italy because it was so soon after the war. His mother and his auntie thought that there wasn't anything for Gilbert there. So he came out here and finished his schooling, and they legally adopted him because he wanted to join the Air Force. So he became Popovich, and he went into the Air Force to a class of, I think there was 89 men in the class, and he graduated the top 12. And only, I think it was the top 7 or 9 became pilots, so he was a co-pilot, which didn't make him happy because he wanted to fly the plane, not to help chart where they were traveling to. When he left the Air Force, he met up with a friend, ran into a friend actually, from Riva, and so he ended up in Beaver Cove, which is across the streets here, and became a logger. He worked one day without pay, and then he went in and asked for a job. And so he logged for, I think it was something like 7 years. He was a logger. Came to Alert Bay 3 times before even knowing the name of our island. And he came here, and when I first saw, the first time I ever saw him, he was working for the village, and he was digging ditches. And he said that's what qualified him to become mayor, because he worked his way up from being an employee, part-time employee, digging ditches, and became alderman for 4 years, and then the mayor of Alert Bay for 28 years.
Gilbert used to come over from Beaver Cove on the weekends to have little parties. You know what I mean? We had 2 or 3 beer parlors and lots of lady friends. And being a handsome Italian, he didn't take long to find himself girlfriends. You know what I mean? So anyway, he I guess fell in love with my wife's sister, Louisa. And they had 5 beautiful children over the years. We were both married. Oh, and we were the only white man in our family. And then they separated, and so he had the children. He had the children, and I believe it wasn't too long after that, but that Louisa passed away. And so Gilbert brought his mother over from Italy to babysit. And she babysat for 3 years. And in the meantime, when he came over and settled in Alert Bay, I hired him. I was on the village council, and I hired him as a laborer for Public Works. And that was his first job in Alert Bay. And then later on, when I was in the taxi business, I hired him to drive taxi. And between driving taxi for me and running a bus, that was part of his job.
He did fly planes when he was in Alert Bay also. And I think he was in part ownership with another person. I think they had a plane between the two of them. But if he flew planes like he drove buses, I don't think I really would have wanted to have flown with him. It's just, and the way that he would drive, he drove like just crazy with and you pretty well took your life in your hands when you went with him anywhere. When he used to drive the bus for me, I would say to him, Gilbert, we will have 2,000 people coming in, tomorrow, and we've got to practice as to where we're going to take these people on the bus. And he would say, no, everything's fine. No, Maxine. He'd say, no. Anyway, the first time that we got the people on the bus, he couldn't figure out how to shut the bus doors, and the bus doors kept opening and shutting and opening and shutting. Then, and the second thing that he did, he backed up the bus and he backed it straight into a great huge telephone pole. And the worst things that he did, he would get more and more excited, and he would speak more and more in Italian and more and more and more. And it was quite funny. So people used to write articles about being driven around Alert Bay by the mayor of Alert Bay and the deputy mayor. It was just funny.
Gilbert, he was a kind of an ambitious sort of person, and eventually he became a taxi owner-driver. We had the 40K taxi, which had 8 cabs for a small little town, 8 taxis. Him and I used to always argue about how he bought my cab out from me, I told him he got a real good deal, and he said the opposite. But anyway, no, he was a good fellow. Well, he wouldn't have been mayor if he wasn't a good man. He was mayor for a lot of years. The other thing he did, which just about all of us did, was fishing was always on your menu. He went fishing. I think it was with Freddie Jolliffe, was it not? And so, of course, he was fishing with Freddie Jolliffe, and I think Margie was, I think she was cooking on there, so eventually he married her.
And Gilbert fished with my Uncle Freddie for quite a few years on the Barkley Sound. I don't know, he always seemed to have his fingers in something. He was always doing some kind of cab driving or fuel dock or something. He was always busy. Gilbert had the fuel dock here in Alert Bay, and it was the last fuel dock left in Alert Bay. There was 3 or 4 here at one time, and they all moved out. But when he first got the dock, it was up for bids or something, and no one else wanted to run it here in Alert Bay, or couldn't get the contract, whatever. But he took it over, and then when everybody found out that Gilbert took it over, then they wanted him to resign or whatever, because it was something to do. You couldn't be mayor and have the fuel dock at the same time. So he did. He resigned. And then they let people vote on it again, and they said, no, Gilbert can run the fuel dock and be mayor too.
I don't know if Gilbert could swim or not, do you?
I don't know. I don't know if he could swim or not. But I know he couldn't swim out here. Maybe up in the lakes, maybe you can, because they warm up. But in here, in the actual ocean, it's just too cold. You don't stay in there for very long. So all these guys that are out there seining and gillnetting and whatnot, if they go overboard, they've had it. And of course, I've had it anyway, even if they can't swim.
No, I didn't fish with him, but I fished when he fished, right? He didn't fish very long though, but and he had his own boat or whatever. He had a little speedboat or whatever. I think Terry still has it, his daughter.
I moved away from Alert Bay when I was 16 years old, and I returned to Alert Bay at 29. My father owned a fish plant, and I got a job with him. His partner didn't want me to work because he thought, oh no, Gilbert's daughter she won't do the job. But it turned out really well, so I worked with him in his processing plant, and then soon after he took over the fuel dock. He was the agent to run the dock here, and he hired me and my sister Vanessa also to help him run it. And not long after, I took over a lot of the responsibilities and taught my dad how to use the computer, because he did not know how to use it at all. So that was lots of fun. I worked with him for about 13 years at the fuel dock until he passed.
I remember at one time when the Mohawks were having their difficulty in Quebec, we were thinking of ways to support the Mohawks, and we decided that the easiest way to support them would be to blockade the road at the graveyard. You see where the totem poles are? So we did that. I think it was the longest standing blockade in Canada. And Gilbert, of course, had a business on the other side of the blockade, and he was having trouble getting his trucks, semi-trailer trucks, to move the salmon that he was marketing. And he said, Bill, can't I go through the blockade? And I said, well, not really. If we let you in, the other people will want to do the same thing. So he went and took the long way around, but he managed to get around the blockade. But even though we were affecting his business, he still supported what we were doing. So as a result, we won our argument on the graveyard. The province agreed to build a road out more towards the beach because they were building the road on top of some of the graves in the graveyard. So Gilbert's fully supported that, even though it was affecting his business.
Gilbert was my uncle. His first wife of my cousins is my mother's sister. Louisa is his first wife's name, and my mother is Martha. And just to note, my mother's mother, my grandmother's a Martin, and we stem from, I'm not sure if you heard of Spruce Martin, Mungo Martin. That is our family lineage, and it's very strong within our Numgies. My mother married a white man, so she lost her status. We became white, so to speak, respectfully. We lived off reserve. We went to the public school as opposed to the residential school. I reflect, it's sad, what happened, and it was even as late as 1996, the last residential school in Canada. So residential schools were put there as part of this, the government's regime toward a genocide of a people, to take the Indian out of the man, so to speak. Children as young as 3 and up were taken from their homes and put into these residential schools where they weren't allowed to speak their language, where they weren't allowed to see their siblings, were supposedly be given an education, but more often than not, it was almost like a labor camp. There was many types of abuse that happened there. You know, and this is really another story on its own, but it was traumatic. It devastated not only our people, but First Nations across Canada and down in the United States as well. Many of the students, not necessarily here, but many of them as a whole within Canada, up to 50% of the students, the children who were taken and put into these residential schools, did never return home. They died. Some of those schools, especially in the prairie and eastern provinces during the winter months, had abominable conditions they were living in, and survival was, you know, a real challenge in every respects. You know, our children who were put in there were made to feel shameful for who they were, and, you know, were just embarrassed and ashamed of who they were. So when they came to our school, I say ours, because when I was white, sort of thing, we didn't know what they went through, and they were embarrassed. You know, they didn't talk about it. So for much of it, I only hear about it from my friends who I went to school with then, in this day, have heard about the terrible things that had happened. And I've sat a number of times with friends who have gone through that, and we've, you know, in tears, finally realizing what had happened in those days. So you have all of these kids, you know, from that early age going up, you know, till their teens, who had no connection with their family, had no connection with their siblings in there, were abused, beaten, sexually, whatever, mentally, emotionally, and being away from their family unit, lost all parenting skills. And that's why we, you know, it persists today with many of ours. It's a vicious cycle. One of the things that we try to do, though, is move forward and acknowledge the trauma that happened, and do the healing work. You know, we're a proud people, and that is coming back, and we're working hard to work in a holistic manner and you know, bring all of this to closure, and you know, we have to break that cycle.
What I do is I get my little kids, my little 4-year-olds ready for kindergarten. So we learn the ABCs, we sing, a lot of play. I really encourage play and, you know, social interaction, because they need to learn that. They need to learn how to get along with one another. I'm going to invite in some elders to talk about stories like with morals, some native elders, just to come in and tell some nice stories of, you know, especially the Zunaqua one. Have you heard about the Zunaqua? She's a legendary big Sasquatch, Bigfoot. A big hairy woman in our legend, and she lives in the woods, and she's really sleepy and tired. And the old people used to say to the children, "You behave. If you don't behave, Zunaqua is going to get you." And so the kids, or if you wander too far from home, the Zunaqua is going to get you and take you away. So to this day, that legend is still used by some elders. But it's a longer story, of course, but it teaches kids about listening skills and respecting the parents and making the right choices.
I grew up with a feeling of being inferior, but not anymore. I feel very strong, and we're very welcoming people. We're very welcoming people. That was our problem. We were too bloody welcoming. We allowed everybody to move into our land. You know, we just welcomed them and helped them. And I know that, like somebody like Gilbert Popovits, who ended up being our mayor in Alert Bay, he found that friendliness in this community. He loved Alert Bay, and it showed in everything he did. He married one of our ladies from the Namgis and had beautiful children, beautiful daughters, and a young son, Tonio, and beautiful, beautiful children. And then he was elected mayor. Then he also ran for government too, in a provincial government. And I supported him. In a position I was at, I was the president of a Native Sisterhood of British Columbia, and I supported his campaign because I believed in what he believed in, like giving people opportunities. And because what you see today in our culture is not what I grew up with, because I was caught in a time when they made changes in our territory here. We weren't allowed to speak our language. They hit us if you spoke our language in our school here. I was caught in that confused time where we're trying to be something you're not. And it doesn't make a person feel good. And I didn't make good choices because I didn't have good feeling here in my heart. I want people to feel proud of who they are and feel strong, because that's not what I grew up with. We were ashamed of who we were because we didn't know. We were made to feel ashamed. Even in the books in the school, nothing, movies, cowboys and Indians, they portrayed us to be such terrible people. Movies that we saw when we were children, we all wanted to be cowboys when we came out of there because we didn't want to be Indian, you know. And it wasn't until they built Umista Cultural Center when I started to know more about what happened to our people, because nobody talked about it. It was almost like it's embarrassed to talk about. And I belong to the Tsasatla cultural group. In our language, Tsasatla means to be determined. And they're determined to keep our songs and our dances alive.
Have much to do with the native culture growing up. Because we were raised by our father, and back when I was younger, it wasn't in the schools like it is now, where they're teaching them the language, they're teaching them the dance. There wasn't as much potlatching. So my sisters, we weren't very cultural that way. We started learning as we got older. My mother, though she spoke Kwakwala, she refused to speak it at that time because it was taken away from them when she was a child. So it's not something she instilled in us. So I'm a little bit behind. I get involved where I can. I guess I'm a bit intimidated because I don't know as much. And the dance I find hard to learn. I've danced in a big house. I've got an Indian name. But I'm very nervous in there, and because I don't feel I'm as culturally educated as a lot of people here.
When Gilbert separated from his first wife, his mother came from Italy, and she was here 3 years, helping Gilbert to raise his children. And she was a very strong woman. She stood 4'11", but a real bumblebee. I wonder what to call her. She was here 3 years, and when she went back to Italy, she took Gilbert's 2 youngest children with her. So Antonio and Anna Maria were raised in Italy, and Tony came to Canada when he was 16. And Anna Maria is still in Italy.
È stata dura quando sono tornato, non parlavo inglese, sono tornato qua, non parlavo una parola in inglese perché sono dovuto tornare subito quando le scuole sono finite, non potevo lavorare in Italia, quindi sono tornato in Canada e non parlavo una parola, ho dovuto imparare l'italiano, l'inglese. Ho dovuto lavorare, nello stesso tempo lavorare, questo è stato duro, i primi 6 mesi era come un brutto sogno, come si dice, un incubo, i primi 6 mesi era un incubo, i primi 2 mesi era un incubo, non volevo andare da nessuna parte, non volevo uscire perché non conoscevo nessuno, mie sorelle e basta, capisci? Dopo mi sono abituato, e più mi sono abituato e più mi è piaciuto, mi sono realizzato, questo è dove voglio vivere, questo è me, questo territorio, questa parte del mondo è dove mi sento più al naturale, più like where I belong. Qui sull'isola, essendo mezzo indiano, mi sento privilegiato. Sapendo quello che so, essendo vissuto in Italia, adesso vivere qui in Canada, ho vissuto le due culture che sono parte di me, la cultura italiana e adesso la cultura indiana, che è la mia altra metà. Così mi sento fortunato prima di tutto, perché sono sempre stato, quando sono tornato in Canada, perché sono nato qua in Canada, quando sono tornato mi sono sentito orgoglioso di essere indiano. Mentre tanta gente qua non sono così, si sentono un po', non imbarazzati, ma non so, mi sono sentito orgoglioso di essere indiano, perché è una cultura meravigliosa, penso, per me. Lo sento, quella parte di me, in me l'ho sempre sentito, quando vivevo in Italia sapevo che c'era qualcosa di differente, mi sentivo differente in alcune cose dai miei amici. Dopo, quando sono tornato in Canada l'ho capito, tante robe, perché io penso di belong, what's belong. Appartengo più qua che in Italia, penso.
With my father, with his mother being here, my Nona, we spoke only Italian, and my friends spoke Italian, and in our home there was only Italian because my grandmother would not learn English. The grocery store people, they learned Italian. The farmer that brought eggs, he learned Italian. Everybody learned Italian, and my Nona never learned any English in 3 years.
He had a very good command of the English language in terms of he could do a crossword puzzle faster than any of us could do a crossword puzzle. So he certainly was not lacking in vocabulary or understanding of the English language, but his Italian accent definitely stuck with him for the whole time, especially when he was getting excited about something around the council table or something, then his Italian accent would get thicker and thicker and thicker. I remember one specific time when we had some government people here that there was a big disagreement about something that Gilbert wanted to do, and so they got him quite mad. And the madder he got, the thicker the accent got, until finally, by the end of the discussion, he was speaking Italian. He wasn't speaking English at all, and waving his arms in good Italian fashion. And they left not understanding what the problem was. So we used to have a lot of fun teasing him about trying to mimic his Italian accent, like, you've been in this country for 40 years and you still don't speak English so good. How come? You know? So, which would make him madder and make his accent get thicker. So he was extremely proud of where he came from, and that would come up very often. You know, where I come from, this is the way we would do things, and where I come from, and as you know, he went back quite frequently to see family in Italy, and. So yeah, we would always tease him about that too. You know, if it was so good where you came from, how come you don't go back there? And just to keep him going again. Yeah, that was. So yeah, he was definitely an Italian, or even until the very end of his life, and yeah, and I think part of him is still there. You know, part of his personality.
He passionately wanted the square. He wanted to have a fountain, but he tried and tried and tried to get us to agree with putting a fountain in there, and so we kept saying no, no, no. We built the square, and we had a contest to name the square, and the people all submitted names, what they thought it should be called. And many years ago, when the island was first settled by two fellows, Spencer and Hewson, to put in the fish saltery, the names that were submitted were Spencer and Hewson. People thought that we should call it Spencer and Hewson Square, and Gilbert did not think we should call it that. and not telling anything to council. He invited the mayor, Mayor Paulin from Victoria, to come and present us with a plaque with the name of the square on it. So in comes the poor mayor of Victoria, didn't know what was going on. None of us on council knew anything about it, and he had this beautiful big brass plaque that said Harmony Square, Harmony Square on it. And the rest of the council said, well, no, that's not the name of the square. And Gilbert, I think for sure he thought that we were going to be embarrassed by all of this and go along with his ideas. And so, no, we weren't embarrassed at all. We told the mayor of Victoria that no, that was not the correct name, and so we made him take the plaque back. Gilbert was not happy at all, not happy at all, and so but the Gilberts had the last laugh on us, because when Gilbert died, the community took up a collection, and guess what's in the town square is Gilbert's fountain, and there it is. And I thought I could just see Gilbert just laughing and laughing, thinking, aha, I've won.
Well, originally, down at the town square, what we call the town square now, it was just going to be a parking lot, and all of a sudden he came up with the bright idea that we'll make a town square out of it. So he went to Vancouver and found an Italian place that made these spindles.
It was called Ital Decor.
And he ordered all these spindles, and they all turned up, and he told me I had to put it together. And then he decided that while the spindles were too expensive, and we were going to build them here. And I did all the spindles for the whole town. It took months. And we changed the tops around a little bit and here and there, and did a little bit of difference. But yeah, he was going to make a little Italy here, but part of it worked out. But we had this little fly. And the bartender came and he spilled some beer on the table. And this little fly, he got in there and he got drunk. So we sort of adopted him.
And we gave him a name. His name was Hemlock, which is appropriate because it was a logging pub, right? Hemlock. And Hemlock, we adopted him. And we were watching Hemlock, and then the bartender came in with another jug of beer, and he put it down on the table, and
he killed Hemlock.
So every July the 13th, which is when it happened, we have a ceremony for Hemlock at the Loggers Club.
Tonio is a good worker. He's a good worker. He works hard, and he was also fishing, so he knows lots of people. And he's very good. He's kind. He's like his father. He's good to people. He treats people good. So he's accepted. Now we don't have fishing anymore in our community. It's collapsed in our community, but he gets called for other jobs that our tribe has initiated. And I'm teaching him our language. I want him to speak our Kwakwala too, our Kwakwala language. So as much as I can, I want him to learn. I said it'd be really nice with his Italian accent.
Misha too. Misha. Dici che hai quello che è in Italia?
In our language, Kwakwala, when you explain things, there's more meaning to what you're saying. It's more expressive. when you're speaking in the language. And I'm a teacher by nature. I teach culture. And if you say to a kid Watla, or if you speak to a child and say Huklilalas in our language, the kid responds better to Kwakula when you're teaching them laws of our people more than English. And unfortunately, we don't speak fluent Kwakula. And it's a really tough language to learn when you're not little anymore. But the language is vital because everything about us it goes through our language. It's a thread for us. It's like everything's woven together with our Kwakula language. Everything has more meaning and connection to the whole. Our whole universe is through the language.
We developed a writing system and then trained people to use it. Developed a series of 12 language books with tapes to go with them. They're used in schools. While I was at the Cultural Center, we also had classes for adults because I would say most people under the age of 50 don't speak the language at all, or didn't. Yeah. And that had to do with schools where the language was forbidden.
We'll be able to negotiate with Canada on a nation-to-nation basis. And the other really important thing is we're going to be out of the Indian Act, which is an act that Canada should be ashamed of. It's an act that throughout the years I think was designed to take away our lands from us. We've seen the written words of the leaders of the day saying that if we can get the Indian out of the child, we'll get rid of the Indian problem. So they put them in these residential schools, forbade them to speak their languages, kept them away from their families for a long time. And then, of course, this building here is a result of the potlatch prohibition that was first put in place in 1884, where our ceremonies were illegal. We couldn't perform our ceremonies. And that was in place until 1951.
My mom's cousin, who I call Auntie, Zia, her family had a potlatch, and they give out Indian names to people in the family, and she knew that Angela and Esther and I did not have an Indian name, and we were adults. So we all received one. Mine is Quinquinquala, which means Thunder Woman. And so I was very privileged when I got that, and my sisters and I danced at the potlatch, and we just got a little lesson outside the big house on how to do it. So it was very, very fun and very honored to receive that.
The potlatch, it's our ceremonial, and it was a very important part of our lives because it encompasses every aspect of our lives. When you're born, when you get a name, when you reach puberty, when you get married, when you die, and so that's what I'm doing. I have a cousin who died, and they're going to do a memorial for her. So the people that come to witness are given something. So like the family gives things away. So I'm making toques for when they do my cousins. Our people were very theatrical. They did things, and the wild man was supposed to bite somebody. Well, he didn't actually bite anybody, but they paid somebody to prick themselves so that a bit of blood will come out. Not a big wound, just enough to. And so they thought that they actually went and bit people. So, and then they couldn't understand giving things away. They had they couldn't understand people just giving their possessions away. But you know, you got it all back, you know. Yeah. I had a cousin who's my grandfather. My grandfather was one of the highest ranking chiefs. So then his son became the chief, and so he used to potlucks, and my cousin said he used to give everything away. The house would just get empty. And so he was a good fisherman. Before long, he replenished his household with everything. And she said there's one time she had a dress that she liked, and she didn't want him to give it away, so she tried to hide it, but they found it and gave her favorite dress away. He was a wonderful man, Gilbert. He was a very good diplomat. And I guess eventually, if he had lived long enough, he might even have become Prime Minister, which would have been a real blessing for us. Yeah. We were friends too, because we both supported the same political party, Gilbert, my husband and I. Yeah. And when my children were in school, the teacher told us the two children in school who knew the political parties and names of leaders now was my son and Gilbert's daughter, Angela.
I'm like my dad, I love interacting with people, and I see them all day long coming and going. If I could help, I'm happy. I used to work at the field dock where my father managed for about 20 years, up until his illness. Then when he could no longer run the company, my sister Terry said no more contract, so we shut it down, and that's when I came to work here at the Numke's Health Center. And I've been here ever since, and I absolutely love it. It was almost like it was my calling, I guess you could say. You know, working with the Numke's people as well as Numke's, and it's really nice. I love doing this. Even growing up, when I was young, I didn't know if I was white or if I was native, because I was born into an interracial family, so I didn't know really where I belonged. But when I got older, I found out that we all belonged together. So it was beautiful. There was no animosity because I was half Italian or half Native Indian.
Gilbert, I would say, was one of the people that built the bridges between people of many cultures, and he made people feel comfortable. And he made this community feel one community, as opposed to we're here on this end and the other end is by the non-native people. Gilbert had a way about him that just shared everything together. He was a fine man, and he was a very supportive man of the events and the accord that happened between us and continues on today as a result. And yeah, feel privileged to have known him.
When I was a young kid, that my grandfather had so much influence in me of being a leader that I wanted to do it in a different form of what he did. So when I first started, it was trying to make it for the youth and just all walks of life to know where I come from and what he taught me in life, like the life skills and how to present myself the way that he would have in the politics and just the ordinary life, and everything that he's done. I wanted to do it in a certain way that I could be respected the same way he was.
Hey Gramps, it's your grandson Luke. I'm here to tell you how I missed you. Now I know that you're right beside me, cause I'm trying to make it like you did it in politicking. I know everybody wants to say that I'm just here to make a couple rhymes about the bay. I'm trying to get across to everybody that there's a better way to party. You gotta know that I'm straight down, sit back with the whole town. I know that you gave it and the fam misses ya. That's why everybody respects the way that I walk and I present myself. But I know I'm grown up for your own help. I got everybody feeling me, so I gotta get down and I rev it up for you, Gramps. Now let's see when the mayor rides, everybody. When the mayor rides, look in the sky.
Gilbert was a good guy. On a serious note, he was a good guy to work with, and He was obviously more pro-Alert Bay than anybody else. He was identified with that community and did a great job as mayor of Alert Bay, no question about it. And we had a friendly rivalry, but we were both immigrants. If you think about it, we started off the same thing. We came here with nothing, worked hard, and he was a very hard-working guy. He was a much harder working person than I was. He was a socialist because I just don't think he had enough understanding about how good it is to be a conservative. I tried to educate him, but he wasn't listening. So, for obvious reasons.
And we socialized. We had dinners at his house. We got together at the Canadian Legion. I too spent some time in the Royal Canadian Air Force, so we had that in common.
I used to go around to his house for one of his famous Italian dinners that he used to cook, except Margie, his wife, usually ended up cooking most of it, while he sat and had his favorite glass of vino.
I enjoyed cooking. Gilbert was always like, why don't you cook this or why don't you cook that? So I said, why don't you cook it? I said, you remember what your mother cooked. You remember what it tasted like. We did have a lot of people, and he was very good at it. And I have never tried to cook polenta or risotto, or every time we moved, he always made sure that he had a little garden where he could plant his vegetables. Or, I mean, one year he grew artichoke, and just like, we were all amazed. We never thought it would grow here, but he loved his vegetables and he loved to try, and he was patient. What it was that it turned off his mind from the political view. It was his way of relaxing, to just putter in his yard and nobody call him, or, you know, and it would shut down his mind. And so he relaxed and regained his energy.
We used to go out fishing with his father-in-law, Margie's dad, and Gilbert took the dog, and the dog used to sit up at the front of the boat and like just enjoy being on the boat. We weren't very good, but we enjoyed it. We'd take a case of beer and sit out there and fish and talk. Yeah, it was good. We'd catch the odd one, but that wasn't the main reason we went. We just wanted to enjoy our company.